Hello everyone, Task Force Venom, this is Captain McCordite coming at you with a commander role training video here. This is for our potentially new JTAC role that we're going to have in the server. But this is not to teach you how to be a JTAC necessarily, this is to teach you how to properly perform the commander role on a squad. So how we're going to do that is we're going to jump into the tutorials and go to the firing range. And we're going to practice some fire support calls, look at the mechanics, and try to talk about what your options are, some tips, some tricks, and just like get a really good basis of how to perform well in this role, how to excel. It's a role that not a lot of people play, and honestly, not a lot of people necessarily care to play. Sure.
Push!
So I forgot to show you one of the things you want to do when you jump in here is to make sure you put on binoculars in the fire support column. Now, one of these I believe gives you the insurgents fire support, and one gives you the security. If you look at the top one, the straight binoculars give you the security fire support. So just make sure you add that to your character. It costs 0 points. Um, yeah, and that's all you need to play as a commander in the firing range. So, commander role. What is the role about? What's the toolkit that you have and how do you use it? The commander's job is to call in fire support to protect the squad, to soften up targets, to take out objectives, to um, defend against an oncoming assault. There are a lot of ways you can use these tools, and we'll talk about them. What you'll notice is if I bring up the selection wheel, if you push right on the D-pad, and it's always right, you will pull out the binocular weapon, and you'll start to see this arrow on the screen, or a sort of like a rail of arrows lighting downwards. This is your tool to call in fire support. You can aim with the binoculars, and it will bring up this really great zoom and picture. And you'll notice the arrow turns from red to green. This is kind of where we talked about the mechanics of calling in fire support. So this is essentially your crosshair in world space that you are pinpointing where the fire support will be centered around or called in on. Um, and so it's all about just putting the arrows at the center of your screen and making sure they're set. Now, you'll notice as I move my cursor, the arrows kind of lag, and I think it's just like a bad implementation personally. Um, and you'll notice that if I look straight up, the arrows themselves are in 3D space, but the little like bar at the bottom is screen space aligned. So as you move this thing around the world, you should know that the distance from your character is is impacting the scale of this thing, which should give you an indication of how far away it's actually triggering. Why is this important? Because as I clip with things, it's clipping with the it's literally tracing a line from the center of my binoculars outward, or the center of my screen, I should say. And if it collides with something, then it moves the point of where we call in the fire support, the origin, closer to that clip point. It clips it off, that line trace. And you'll notice if I shoot it through this car, I can actually call it in through the vehicle's windows to the hillside on the other end. So something to keep in mind as you're trying to find a good spot to call this stuff in on, use the ground. Try to make sure that your guys aren't going to run in front of you and mess you up. So if you're standing with a group of your teammates here and you're trying to call in fire support, I would be very careful about that. I would try to make sure they're getting out of your way, and crouching in front of them is a great way to give them the ability to shoot over you without trying to get in front of you to engage targets. So your goal is to uh, put that bar and the tip of the bottom arrow where you want to call in the fire support, using the scale of the thing and what you believe to be the actual clip plane of your view, a guide on where you're actually calling it in on. You know, I could call it in on this target here, but if you look at this character, it actually goes through him. It doesn't clip with him. It's clipping with the box on the other side, I believe, or the sandbags. It actually might be clipping with his water bottle. Nope. You can see it goes through him. It's clipping with those rocks. So it actually shouldn't be clipping with other characters, but I've had some weird times where I'm pretty sure it clipped on like a teammate or an enemy. So just be careful. Why is it green here and why is it red over here? That's because every commander requires an observer role within a proximity of them within 10 meters in order to call in any fire support. So if my observer runs away from me or I run away from him and we're outside of the 10-meter range, you'll see the arrows turn orange, and that indicates you are too far from your radio man for them to call in fire support. If your radio man dies while they are calling in fire support, it does not successfully call in the fire support. If you die while the radio man is calling in fire support, i.e. the commander dies, the radio man can still successfully call in an air support. So you could call in a chopper, get clapped on a defense immediately, but your radio man gets the call off. The fire support will still be good, and it'll be ordered. So that's an interesting tactic. If you're just trying to get something off, it's a chopper, and we'll talk more about the mechanics of each fire support item later. But you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of my screen, I have this weird little scale, and it's going up and down as I move further away from or closer to the observer. And that's telling you how far your nearest observer is, because you can have two observers, actually. And they can, rotate it in and out, and the closest observer is the one that's going to call it in. So you could give a call in near this observer, and then he runs away, and another observer comes by, and he gets killed. The guy who is near you when you called it in, I believe, is the one that is actually trying to make the call for fire support. You can also see smoke artillery is currently the active fire support call in. This is very important. I cannot tell you how many times Major Smith has called in smoke artillery when he intended on doing an air strafe or mortar call, artillery something. He has called smoke artillery in so many times because he didn't properly select a different fire support element. Now we're going to talk about how to do that. If I don't have my binoculars out and I tap the left shoulder button, L1, you can see it brings up this comma rows comms wheel. And I can actually request an observer as an element that's unique to the commander role. So I can say, hey, observer, where are you? That's very helpful if on that bottom left scale your observer is like 50 or plus meters away. You can say, hey, where's the observer? And that doesn't, clutter up the actual voice comms, and it just puts a UI element on screen for your observers to know, hey, commander's trying to do something right now, I need to get over to him. I may be engaging targets, but that's a lot easier to pay attention to than random chatter, honestly. So that's what happens if you bring up the command wheel with L1 with something out that's not binoculars. But look what happens if I switch to my binoculars and I tap L1. I get a different comma rows. I get a different wheel here, which is my fire support wheel. And that fire support wheel is how you select which fire support you're trying to use. It has a lot of other useful information on it, such as the number of fire support call-ins you have for that element left or remaining. It also has a little circle, which is actually sort of a loading time bar or cooldown, I should say cooldown for that fire support after you call it in. And we'll demonstrate this in a minute. But you can see I have smoke artillery selected in the bottom left. Well, if I just go up and tap L1 again, you see it just like fires my screen up because I'm holding the right joystick up when I do that. Um, I now have explosive artillery selected. And if I want to switch, as long as you're not putting your finger on the right trigger and you have good trigger discipline with the binoculars, you're not accidentally going to call something in incorrectly. Don't use the right trigger to select. Use the left bumper. Okay? I'll switch to autocannon, minigun, explosive again, helicopter. Okay? You can see I'm switching and selecting. It's very easy. Just use trigger discipline and just tap L1. So that's how you switch between your fire support elements. That's how you maintain distance with your observers. And that's how you guide your pinpoint origin of where the element is going to get called in on. Now we're going to talk a bit more about the fire support elements and their mechanics thus far. Looking at this wheel, we have five different fire support that we can call in as the security team. We're not going to talk about insurgents, because fuck insurgents, especially fuck their fire support for the most part, unless you're in like multiplayer or something. It's just not as effective as security. But we're going to start from the bottom left and work our way around. The bottom left is minigun support. Now, these two on the bottom are both helicopters. They will call in a chopper. I believe it looks like the same chopper. I could be wrong. This may actually be a different chopper. I think this is an Apache and this is like a Black Hawk. This calls in a Black Hawk, the minigun support, and it will rain down essentially a Vulcan cannon of minigun bullets on targets that it selects. We'll talk more about how the chopper works later, but I'm giving you a brief overview for now. You only get one of each chopper per round. If you fail a round, the next time you come in, when you respawn and a new round starts, you get all your fire support back. So you never regain fire support unless you fail a round. The autocannon strafe is an A-10 Warthog that strafes a target in about a 50-meter line. It is a direct line. There is some width to that, or depth, if you will, to that line, but for the most part, it's 50 meters wide. And there's a mechanic of actually calling this in a direction. We'll talk about that when we demonstrate. The explosive artillery. You can see you get a lot of these. Unfortunately, they kind of suck on security. The insurgents have a really impressive display of mortar volleys. The security does not. I'm going to demonstrate now because it's not worth saving it. Oh, and the worst part of this is in the firing range, you do not regain fire support as far as I can tell. I've tried to respawn, I've tried to kill myself, I've tried to re-kit, I've tried to remove the binoculars and add them back through this ammo crate. I've tried to use the range computer settings. I've tried to kill my observer. I can't get fire support to respawn in the firing range, so you just have to reload in, unfortunately, from what I can tell. I would love it if somebody could tell me otherwise. We're going to demonstrate a call-in of the artillery. Now, I'm not going to do an RTO call-in right now, because that's not what this is about. It's not about teaching you how to be an RTO or a JTAC. This is about teaching you how the role of commander works in the game, because if you can excel at this role in PvE with pickups and randoms, then you can certainly excel at this role in Venom. So we have our explosive artillery selected. We can tell in our bottom left corner. We know our observer is within 10 meters. I am at an elevated position, so I have really good ways of calling in the explosive mortars. And I'm going to demonstrate this now. I'll demonstrate on this car because it's out in the open, and we're making sure that the arrow is on the vehicle and not clipping through that like window or anything. The easiest way to ensure that you're getting a good target is to put it on terrain or a hard target like a building that doesn't have a lot of windows or doors, solid walls, solid structures. That's going to help you make sure that you're not like, clipping through something, or you're sending it into a building's window, which doesn't necessarily help. Maybe you wanted to send it into the on the outside of the wall, or maybe you did want to send it into the window. Like up here, if I wanted to bomb this building, I'd want to make sure I was going around this target in the window and hitting the center of the floor in the room. But let's call it in. Now, once I call this in and fire like it's a gun, use your trigger, your right trigger, you'll see the commander will call it in. Calls in explosive artillery. I'm going to continuously hit this to demonstrate something. If you fuck up, it's not the end of the world. You can keep calling this in, and your radio man will not actually make the call in. This is how you course correct. Okay? So I just called it on myself. Oh fuck, somebody ran in front of me and I fucked up. Just keep calling it in until you get it right.
Station, this is Observer. We need you to fire explosive artillery here. Over.
Your observer will call in the fire support. You will get a response from TOC or station. You will see smoke appear on the target that you had on the origin point. The smoke designates where it's going to be on the origin, and the color designates what type of fire support it is. Red for mortars, yellow for strafes, green for miniguns, and purple for assassin, I believe. I could be wrong. And you'll see the mortars, they're only about maybe a 20-meter radius. And you only get about 6 of them. Okay? It's pretty pathetic. Something to note, however, people don't know this a lot unless you've been sitting in a building and you got fucked up, is that you can actually get damaged or killed by mortars through a roof. Okay. Now, look at what's happening. You can see on the bottom left I have a cooldown on the explosive artillery. If I bring up this Comoros, you can see the explosive artillery is cooling down there as well. And you can see I have this little clock here. That indicates I can't call that thing in. But you can see if I switch over to my auto strafe, I can call that in. So, there are 2 different cooldowns. There is a cooldown for the particular fire support element, and then there is a cooldown for your ability to spam fire support. Every fire support call, from my understanding, and I timed this, is you get 1 minute of cooldown before you can switch to another fire support and call something else in. Each fire support has its own cooldown in general. But you could call in an auto strafe, and then a minute later call in a minigun, and then a minute later call in a gunship. There's nothing that says you can't do that. So we talked about how to course correct your fire support calls, and you could actually switch fire support while you're course correcting. So if you're fast, you can actually tap, switch, tap, and then call something else in before your observer starts making the call and completes it, which gives you time to not only course correct say you accidentally deployed smoke, and you're like, oh fuck, I didn't want to deploy smoke, I want to deploy mortars or a strafe run. You can call the smoke in again, then to refresh the cooldown, switch to your strafe or mortars, and then call that in, and keep course correcting. Okay? It's not a one and done thing. Fix yourself. All right? It's okay. If you say, listen, I don't want to hear, oh fuck, I just called an auto strafe in on us. I don't want to fucking hear that. All right, commanders? Fix yourself. All right? Now we're going to demonstrate the auto strafe run. And what you need to know is that don't just tap the right trigger, hold it down. And what will happen is, if you hold it down, you can see the arrows are no longer pointing up and down. In fact, they are moving left to right. And that's because the A10 Warthog strafes a target in a perpendicular fashion if you just tap the trigger. Wherever you are looking, the Warthog will strafe perpendicular to your view. Okay? And those arrows indicate that. But, now listen, I'm holding down the right trigger. I have not let go of it. What if I start moving my joystick, my right thumbstick? Look what's happening. You can see the arrows are turning with my joystick. And I'm actually guiding the direction of the strafe. Okay? Now if I let go, it will maintain that position to the best of its ability. So, this is how you direct which way your strafe is going to come in. Let's say you're looking at a courtyard of a building, and your guys are on their way over there. But they're approaching from the right or left. You could strafe it forward and backwards if you needed to, or you could strafe two buildings that were catty corner to one another. So this way we can change the direction of our strafe. Now I'm going to push the stick forward. You see the arrows are moving toward us. I don't actually know if that's the direction the A10 comes in on, if it's going to be forward, back to front or not, but we're going to try this. So I'm going to call it in where it is parallel to my view, not perpendicular. Now my right thumbstick is forward, and my trigger is held down. I'm going to let go of the trigger while holding forward on the thumbstick, just to make sure that the positioning is correct.
I need a gun run on this position.
You should see yellow smoke pop up right where we called it in. And I would expect the A10 to come directly at us from back there. We're going to see what happens. There's some danger close shit right here.
Here it comes!
Boom. That was a pretty big strafe, but it called in the strafe pattern directly matched the direction the arrows were lighting up. Okay? So you can completely identify which direction the A10 is coming in on. I'm going to go move over here in front of this car where I called in the smoke. That's 40 meters. And that's supposed to be the center of where the strafe came in on, I believe. I'm pretty sure it's a midpoint. But we can check that.
Observer, this is station. Fire support is now ready. Awaiting coordinates.
We're gonna verify that by calling in another fire support. And you just heard the guy coming on the radio say, "Fire support's ready." Well, if I switch to my mortars now, and you can see the auto strafe just finished actually, but I could switch to my mortars, and I was able to call in fire support once he made that call. This time we're gonna call it in, and we're going to do it in the opposite direction. I'm gonna pull the stick toward me. Okay. You can see the arrows are going away from me now. So we're gonna call it in toward me. I'm gonna actually not zoom in just so this is clear. All right, now we're gonna let go. I'm pulling the stick back, right? Not forward like I did last time. So I would expect the A10 to come from behind me and light the target up and head away from us. Let go of the thumb.
Hit that position, light those
There we
fuckers
go.
up.
Station, we need this position right here. Strafed. Attack this target.
Observer, this is station.
Smoke.
On its way. Get ready.
Remember, we were 40 meters away and we got killed. See what happens from here.
He's gonna strafe it.
Incoming. And you can see, just like I said, it went away from us. So the arrows directly coincide with the direction of the strafe. So JTACs, RTOs, you can now completely, if you are the JTAC in charge of this, you can completely tell which grid coordinates the strafe is coming from and heading to. So you know exactly which keypad or grid plot it's moving from. Remember, that was 40 meters away, and I don't think it clipped us, probably because the building saved us, right? Um,
Station, all right, your fire support is now
I'm
available.
pretty sure this building saved us a little bit. So it's at least a 40-meter pattern. What we could do to measure this distance is call it in again on that car, but go stand somewhere over there and look for the endpoint, run over to the endpoint, and then check the computer range from there and see about where we're at to get a little bit better diameter check. But you can guess it is probably 100-meter diameter linear distance that this thing is lighting up. That's a big convoy. That's a big road. That's a big, alleyway. That is not insignificant. It does mean you need to be wary of where you and your squad mates are relative to that thing if you are guiding it in a different direction. But it's a pretty large distance that it covers. That's the autocannon strafe. We talked about mortars. Um, we didn't talk about smoke, mostly because smoke is useless in PvE. It's very, very, very effective in PvP. But in PvE, um, the AI is just too broken. They can see through smoke, so we just don't use it. The helicopter gunship, which is named Assassin, is an Apache gunship that fires both rockets and a 50mm cannon. I think it's 50. It might be like 40 or something else. I'm sure Tommy knows. But it's probably a 50 cal, or I'm pretty sure it's a 50 cal cannon that is, it will destroy like vehicles, and it can pretty much deal damage through any rooftop. And then rockets will also deal damage to rooftops and whatnot. Um, we can demonstrate those in a minute, but right now I'm going to go ahead and show you something with the artillery. People forget with artillery, and this is the only way I try to like maintain some use of mortars with security, is that you can actually deal damage to people inside buildings through rooftops. When it comes to mortars, I use them as a defensive tool to cut off spawn points that enemies are going to run through, and I use it as a tool to soften up buildings on second floors and try to take out objectives without wasting an air strafe, because the strafe cannons are your absolutely most like useful air support, and the mortar's fire support is not as useful, but you get a lot of them. So I'm going to show you what you can do. I'm going to call in mortars on this building over here. I'm going to run up there and show you can take damage from mortars and die when they land on your head. So when insurgents are firing mortars at you, you better watch out and not be in a place where they can land on your head. I think rockets can do similar damage, but they don't have as much penetration. But mortars have insane penetration, so watch out. So we're going to do this. Call it in.
Explosive artillery! This target!
I'm going to run over there.
Station, hey, we need you to fire your guns. Fire
Ah!
explosive
Ah!
Ow.
Shit!
here.
Observer, this is station. Affirmative. Steel rain inbound.
Okay. Shots out. I'm going to start a timer, and we're going to determine how long it takes for the mortars to splash out. All right, I'm going to stand up here. Stand in the fucking middle here. That is about 25 seconds. for splash. Trying to take damage here. Alright, well, it didn't do it. Yeah. The insurgent ones are way better. But if I got hit directly by a mortar, it would probably kill me. Definitely insurgent mortars can do that. Sometimes they'll hit through walls. There's some weird stuff that goes on there. But just, and that probably just demonstrates how ineffective mortars can be, honestly. But yeah. Alright, now let's talk about helicopters. What I'm going to do is I'm going to call in a minigun after I spawn. Well, what I'll do is I'll spawn the enemy squad. We'll call the minigun in right on that car, and we're going to see what it does.
Get me minigun support right here.
I'm going to wait a second for the to call in the enemies.
Send us minigun support at this target.
Observer, this is station.
Alright, I started a timer now to see how long it takes the minigun to show up after he's confirmed the call-in. Note the smoke is purple, so assassin is green, sorry. The minigun is purple.
This is Cleric. I'm on location, moving to position.
Okay,
Sounds like they're here.
minigun showing up. Spawning an enemy squad. About 20 seconds to show up, maybe 25 before he can actually start shooting. Remember, I've called it in on this car, so we're going to look at the flight pattern of this thing. Alright, so it's about 30 seconds before it can start actually engaging targets.
Got target. Opening fire.
Now you can see the minigun is he's flying above the target location, sort of around it. So their goal is to fly around this position and engage targets. Why is this useful? Because if you call in the minigun, you want to make sure that he's going to have line of sight to the location of the enemies. Damn, motherfucker. Yeah, and friendly fire is a big deal. So look how far away he is from that position. I'm going to call in a vehicle now.
Alright, we're all done and we're gonna head back. Cleric out.
That was a pretty, honestly, pathetic demonstration of the minigun. But you can see sometimes they get in a spot where maybe it's not going to actually hit the enemies because it's not flying in a good spot to hit them. So if they rushed up, the enemies would have
Okay, they're
not been visible from the chopper.
station out.
So this is helpful when you're thinking about courtyards. The biggest thing I think about, like the hardest place to defend I think of are places where the chopper has to fly sort of above a target and shoot directly down at it, and that's something the minigun cannot do. So if you think about precinct Charlie objective, it has that big courtyard, right? And it's 2-story courtyard all the way around. The minigun can't shoot in it effectively if you place the origin inside the courtyard. You almost have to put it somewhere further away so the minigun will like fly above the courtyard in an angle that it could shoot downward. It's really difficult to do that, which is why some of those defenses are very tough. In fact, calling in smoke on those actually might be the best way to save your entire squad and just hide in the smoke until things pass. But that's the minigun for the most part. I wish I could just like refresh the fire support so I could show you other ways of calling it in. Like if you call it in over at this fence and engage targets over here, it might be helpful. But when it comes to the helicopters, the safest bet is probably just call it in on the objective. Another good example of somewhere where I don't do that is the final objective on Hillside, when you're in that 2-story building with the back alleys on the other side. because the enemies spawn on the back side and they run through those back alleys to the objective. So they're not actually exposed from the front. If you call in the chopper and it flies in front of you, it's not going to actually see anybody on the back side. So what I do is I run up along the left and I call it in behind all those buildings on the back alleys to where the enemies are spawning. And the chopper engages them in the open field behind all the buildings. So think about where your enemy's spawning and call it in that direction. So if they're spawning back over there, call that chopper in over there so that as soon as they spawn in, that thing can shoot at them. Don't call it in right on your objective all the time because you may be in a place where it's really hard to defend. If this is where they're flooding into, the chopper's not going to be able to see in this courtyard here. So it's not going to do any damage unless it's on that side of this courtyard. If it's out there, then yeah, it can shoot in here and chew everybody up. But if it's like over there, it can't see any of this. So think about the line of sight for a chopper that's flying around the objective in a random pattern. It's not always easy. Always call stuff in where the enemy is spawning to the best of your ability. Alright, we're going to switch over to the helicopter gunship, the Assassin. I'm going to call in, first off, I'm going to reset the enemies. Then I'm going to call in an enemy vehicle. I'm going to call in Assassin right on that wall. Actually, we'll call it right in that open field.
Call for a gunship!
Station, this is Observer. We need gunship support at this target. Over.
What's going to happen is they're going to order a chopper, an Apache, to come in, and it's going to fire a volley of rockets without asking any questions and opening up with its 50 mil cannon. Did that vehicle spawn? No. Okay.
We're on our way to target.
Get ready for the rockets. Okay, it's coming in from behind. It might actually hit us,
Now.
which is something you need to watch out for.
Rockets out.
Here we go. Wow. Holy shit. Here's the Apache. I've spawned a vehicle. Spawn a squad. Okay, I think the vehicle's somewhere over there most likely, or the enemies are. You can see it's firing like a very heavy 50 millimeter cannon. Might even be bigger than that. And those things have splash damage, by the way. Like, a lot of splash damage. So the Apache is a very, very powerful foe. Now, in the firing range, you can't actually spawn in enough people to really demonstrate how effective those choppers can be. But I've seen a chopper take out 15 guys, at least, in one run. And that is a lot of targets that your guys don't have to shoot at or take bullets from. Those are grenades not coming on the field. Those are suicide vests that never made it to you. Those are techies that got taken out early. Save those choppers for a really, really hard defense or the final objective. I always save a chopper for final objective. And personally, I find the minigun to be more valuable than the Apache for some of those final defenses, because when you are a commander and you are defending that final objective, a lot of times you're inside the building hunkering down and you're ready to call in fire support. The one fire support you don't want to call in on yourself at the end of that like that is definitely the Apache, because those rockets go right towards your target. They will mess you up through walls, whereas a strafing run, you can hide within walls a lot of times. The mortars, you saw me dodge 6 mortars over there. But that Apache, that will mess you up big time, you and your guys, if you called in on a final objective on top of yourself. Don't do that. Don't do it. All right, so we've run out of fire support now. I have to restart. And I forgot to see how long that Apache took to fly in. Um, so let's talk about, as a commander, what you should be doing most games. You've probably played as an observer, and you know your job is to follow the commander around so that you're within that 10-meter range so they can call stuff in when they are trying to do so. Because it's really annoying when you are trying to call stuff in and you can't do it. Okay.
Get moving.
As a commander,
Okay.
your first objective, like the observer, is to stay alive as long as you have fire support. Because those two choppers, especially on the final fight, are super important, which is why I like to save minigun for the final objective instead of assassin if I have to use a chopper for a defense. And the reason is, if I die before the final objective, I will always respawn at that final objective. I always have a chance to quickly call in fire support and just tap it on myself and just be like, call it in, done, you know? And the minigun is the one that you want to just tap fire on yourself if you really have to. So you're on hideout and you're spawning in that little castle at the end, or you're on citadel and you're defending that little castle at the end, and you respawn right next to your observer. Fuck it, calling the minigun. You know, station. I'm calling it, requesting cleric on site. Objective golf. Keypad. Echo 3 keypad 7-5 over. How copy? It's like very quickly you can get cleric off at the end there. So what was I talking about? All right, as commander, your goal is to carefully use your strafing runs to do a couple things. One, try to blow up enemy encampments that have a demo target. So if you have an objective that has to be blown up, strafing runs are a great tool to soften that up. If you can use mortars to do it, I would prefer to use mortars, just because you're not wasting your precious auto strafes. And hey, if the mortars fuck up, who cares? And they only have like a 20-meter radius, and like you could probably survive half that. So honestly, if you can use mortars because the thing's out in the open, do it. I like to use mortars to cut off enemy spawns. Strafing runs are really effective if you know you're on like a defense, you have a lot of strafing runs left, and you've got this linear area that you want to take out. For example, I know this building has a courtyard. If I am, I'm gonna go get, as security, you spawn that direction to the south, and you come at it from over here, from Delta. Over here at Delta, I know that building has a courtyard. I could pull out my auto strafe and I could strafe that target, directing it
I need an observer.
towards that building in this direction, and the strafe would go right over there in there. I could even do it on the top of this building and get a pretty sweet angle. It's probably better and safer if I don't have to call it in towards myself. If I can use this side of the building to call it in laterally and perpendicularly to our position,
I need an observer.
and call it in so that it goes right across the courtyard, it strafes the target. And we can still continue to push from this side while that's happening. And we could, engage this side of the building and get on site. But obviously, there's a courtyard there. So it's also a good idea to call in mortars um, on that frickin' palm tree. Yes, that palm tree is a great way to call in a mortar strike. Prison, if you've at the very first objective on prison, you have that tiny opening in the front, but you have that large cylindrical like atrium room that has 3 stories in the middle. Calling in a mortar strike right in the middle there is awesome. So think about where if your objective has an open roof or not, or open courtyard, and soften that bitch up. Those palm trees, I bet nobody's thought of this. Those palm trees are a perfect mortar strike to clear out that whole courtyard and splash all those guys. This objective has practically no open rooftops. So I usually don't even use fire support here because I just start prepping all these rooms with grenades. Right? So if you soften up a target, your guys could, save a few grenades if they had to. We're going to go talk about some other areas as well. In fact, I'll just show you this whole map. So that was Delta and Echo. Let's go to Charlie over here. Charlie's up in this multi-story building, so you also don't have a lot of options here. You could mortar strike it because the objective is on the top floor. And you have a strong chance of hitting some asshole up here on the balconies who's not paying attention. You've probably already shot these guys from over there because you're going to come over from Bravo. So you probably would have already killed anyone up here, but making sure this courtyard's clear is really helpful, and then all you have to do is prep this room, right? Once you prep this room, then you can just keep focused on that backside. There's nobody going to sneak up over here because you've softened up this side. So calling in a mortar strike can be helpful, but you have to get the right angle. What I'd like to do is if I call it a mortar strike on this, I like to get it into the building. So through that doorway is probably the best spot. You can also call it in upstairs through that window. You get a little bit more depth. But this is a pretty safe spot to call in a mortar strike on. If for some reason there's a lot of guys running around over there spawning, shooting at your team from that courtyard, you can switch to your strafe, and you can strafe it on the corner of this building in the direction of the courtyard, and it will go right through that building into that courtyard where the guys are spawning and running in there from. So that's also kind of helpful. Always try to think about where the objective is and where they're spawning from. Connect those 2 points, and you got a pretty good chance of a strong strafe run. Oh, one thing to mention. For strafe runs in particular, in the top left corner you'll see kill confirmed or not. For all my RTOs and JTACs, it's important to use that as a mention to the SL that whether it was good effect or not on target. And if it was bad effect, it helps the SL know that it didn't work, or it's also a good reminder for you hey, I didn't call this in properly, or I did but there were no guys there. So it's just kind of a feedback loop for us to know what happened. And it's also helpful to relay that to the TOC so that they know, okay, you used this asset but it was ineffective, why, or maybe we want to try to work on that. I've had games where I called in 3 airstrikes and I had bad effect on all of them. When you're approaching Bravo objective here, there's another big courtyard, and there's a perfect opportunity to call in a mortar strike right on that pillar. You might be able to get it on that tree, but I have never been able to do that effectively. You might be able to get it on the rooftop through there, but once again, that's really hard to do. So I like to call in a mortar strike right on the back side of the building, and it'll usually pop that demo target that's right here. I think it's here. Yeah. No, I won't show it to you, but the demo target's right here. And if you don't do it with the mortar strike or a strafing run, then I would expect the demo to be launching RPGs up there. Some Carl Gustavs or a Law or something. So that's Bravo objective. Hopefully you're seeing a pattern here that like, oh, there's some courtyards. I have an opportunity to soften up this target with a strafe run or a mortar strike. For my commanders, one thing I like to do when I'm approaching Alpha is to take this back alley on the back side on the south and get up in this building, because up here I can see right into this doorway. And what's in there? A fucking courtyard. Mortar strike right on that stair banister. Perfect spot. You'll get like 3 mortars in there. Pretty big chance. And if you don't, there's an upstairs. You'll probably hit somebody. This spot to mortar is pretty helpful to clear out the open area of the room. Because if you time it right, anybody who's stacked up here is perfectly safe from the mortar strike. That 20-meter radius doesn't touch this. So you guys are safe to move in while that strike's going off, and you can relay that to them and say, stack up, do not enter, prepare to breach on splash over mortars, right? So you could coordinate a pretty cool strike here, and you could do it with a strafe run if you really wanted to, if you're going east to west or west to east. But I prefer stack up here with the mortar strike. Your guys here are covering both these entrances. All of a sudden, you breach, and now you're clearing while you're sure nobody's sitting out here fucking with you. And if they are coming through, they're getting lit up. Pretty cool tactic. Those are the mortars, and you could call in a chopper on defense here, but it's not super helpful. This can be a really tough building to defend, mostly because there are technically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ground floor entrances, and then another second story entrance that the enemies come through. That's a shit ton of entrances, and this is the only spot that you can funnel them. So it gets really tough. What I like to do is try to get multiple guys posted up in these corners in here, so that you can safely like engage targets without really exposing yourself too much. It's tough though to crossfire, but the JTAC has a pretty cool little window over here that you can call shit in from safely. And you can sit here and just constantly rip on dudes. So calling a mortar strike on that corner over there is helpful because it will cover this area. You can call it right in the courtyard here. Just make sure that you're not popping this rooftop or that nobody's up here. But yeah, you could call it a mortar strike right here in this corner, or you could call a strafe run that is headed sort of along this backside towards the Bravo objective, because that's kind of where they're going to spawn from. It's just not as easy to pinpoint that. And then obviously, while you're defending, if you're back up here with your RTO, you could totally just pop out and do a call in danger close mortar strike or strafe run here. People forget to use the mortars. Just make sure you're paying attention to the difference between, like, whether it's a courtyard or a big linear area like a bridge or something, or a road. Make use of the differences between the airstrikes and the mortars, because they have very different patterns. The mortar strike will hit within like a 20-meter radius, but only hits from straight up and down, whereas the gun run has a bit of an angle. You can get it into doorways. Like if I call something in here, it could actually shoot a good amount into this doorway as it strafes across here. And it has about a 100-meter diameter. So that's pretty much it. Like I said, save your minigun for the end. Stick with your observers. Call for your observers if you need to. Call for them by putting away your binoculars and using that center
Get me the radio.
center comms check. But anyways, this is Captain McCordite. This has been a commander role training video for future JTAC RTOs. Thanks for sticking around. Take care.